in our region to treat rare diseases. I also want to say a quick welcome and a very special thanks to one of the New England Council's newest members, and that's Mass Bio. And there are many Bio members who are here today. I just want to say thank you, and again, welcome to the Council. It's hard to believe that we are already in the second quarter of 2024. The year has gotten off to a great start, and we have a very busy calendar of events in store this spring. On Friday and this week, we'll be in Hartford for Capitol Hill Report Breakfast with Congressman Joe Courtney. In the coming weeks, the New England Council hosts programs with two of the region's governors, our governor here in the Commonwealth, Maura Healey, and New Hampshire's Governor Chris Sununu. And we are just a few weeks away from our 2024 Washington Leaders Conference in D.C., and there are already over 200 of our dearest and closest friends from all 6 New England states that have registered to join us for 2 days of meetings, briefings, and receptions with all of the members of the New England delegation and the United States senators and their staffs and other key federal policy makers. If you haven't registered yet, please do so, as space is filling up very quickly. As always, you can find more information and register for any of these events on our website, newenglandcouncil.com, or by scanning the QR code at your table. But today we're pleased to present the latest installment of our New England Innovates series, which was first launched back in 2017. Each installment of this series has explored a different issue or a sector within the New England Council's innovation economy and explored some challenges and opportunities to ensure our region remains a global innovation hub. And let me just also thank at this time Sean Malone from our office who put together this program. It's not easy to do, and he's exceeded all expectations. Emily Heisek, who runs our Washington, D.C., has also been involved in this. So to both of them, congratulations on putting this program together. If you're really pleased, let me know, because I like to get the good news. If you find this, it wasn't what you wanted, talk to staff. I don't really get involved in that. But today we're going to take a look at rare diseases and the work underway to develop cures. In the United States, rare disease is defined as one that affects less than 200,000 people, which is about 1 in every 1,500. As of 2022, there are about 7,000 known rare diseases, and an estimated 25 to 30 million Americans live with them. Fortunately, here in New England, we have some incredible businesses and organizations that are working each and every day to develop treatments for these rare diseases, as well as elected officials, like our very special guest here today, Congressman Jake Auchincloss, who are working to advance policies that will support continued innovation. And today we'll hear from some of them. The Council is incredibly grateful to our member, Alexion, AstraZeneca Rare Disease, for not only generously sponsoring today's program, but also for working with our staff over the last several months to shape today's discussion. Alexion is a leader in rare disease innovation, headquarters right here in Boston, and with a Center of Excellence in New Haven, Connecticut. We're honored to be joined today by several of Alexion's senior executives, including Del Lavelle, head of U.S. Government Affairs and Policy, who will moderate our panel discussion a little later in the program, and Scott Weintraub, Senior Vice President at Alexion's U.S. Business, who will introduce our keynote speaker. So with that, I thank you again for joining us. Now I'm going to invite Scott to the podium.
On behalf of Alexion, AstraZeneca Rare Disease, thank you so much for taking the time out to be here today. Thank you to the New England Council. Thank you to James Brett for organizing this very special and timely event. It's especially timely as many of the rare disease community is actually right down the street as we're celebrating the World Orphan Drug Congress just a few blocks away, where a lot of these same issues and others are being discussed in terms of how do we bring innovative therapies to the rare disease community. I'm also thrilled that there is so much interest in the topic of rare disease and policy solutions that will enable scientists, researchers, the biopharmaceutical industry, as well as the FDA, to more efficiently bring life-changing medicines and treatments to the rare disease community. There's no question that we need more regulatory solutions and support from all of our policymakers when it comes to treating rare diseases. There is actually now more than 10,000 rare diseases affecting an estimated 400 million patients worldwide. Collectively, when you think about that, there's very few people who can be unaffected by the impact of rare diseases in our communities. More than 90% of these diseases do not have any treatments, and 1 in 2 are actually impacting children who are living with rare disease. It can take up to 5 years for a diagnosis to be made, and this involves numerous visits to specialists, several different types of specialists, enormous amounts of tests, enormous amounts of hospitalization, and even after all of that, the outcomes can have high morbidity and mortality where there's no treatments available. At Alexion, we've been on a 30-plus year mission to do better for people living with rare diseases. Alexion is focused on serving patients and families affected by rare diseases and devastating conditions through the discovery, development, and commercialization of life-changing medicines. Our research pipeline is focused on investigational molecules across a range of therapeutic areas: nephrology, hematology, neurology, cardiology, ophthalmology, and a range of modalities, whether it's silencing, RNA, cell and gene therapies. The expansion of innovation continues across the industry and certainly at Alexion. Part of this mission, though, also includes advocating for policy and regulatory changes that have a big impact on patients through earlier diagnosis, delivering the life-changing medicine, and actually ensuring that there's equal access across the landscape for people to obtain these medicines. We can ensure patients have a strong regulatory environment and encourage research to continue the innovation in the area of rare disease. 40 years ago, the Orphan Drug Act was actually the primary legislation that caused innovation to occur in this space. The ODA created several approaches to incentivizing companies to take on high-risk research into rare diseases. These included defining rare diseases as those affecting fewer than 200,000 people, creating tax credits, protecting market exclusivity, and exempting companies from user fees. All of these incentives worked. Prior to the law, there were only 38 medicines to treat rare diseases. Today, there are more than 1,200 FDA-approved products. With 10,000 rare diseases and only 1,200 approved products, it's clear that there's still more work to do, regardless of how much progress that has been made. That's why we are concerned that certain portions of the Inflation Reduction Act, a federal law that could set portions of the ODA backwards, that we want to try to address. Under the IRA, certain rare disease drugs are excluded from Medicare drug price negotiations, but the exclusion applies to orphan drugs that treat a single indication or a specific use. What this deters industry from doing is looking at already drugs that are proved safe and effective in one disease from continuing that research and development into other diseases that patients may benefit from. Congress can address this issue by passing the Orphan Cures Act, which ensures that medicines that treat one or more rare diseases will not automatically face negotiation. But there are also other bills that we need to pass that help people living with rare diseases. There's the Creating Hope Reauthorization Act of 2024, which will renew the FDA's priority review voucher program for companies that are developing treatments for rare pediatric diseases. There's the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act, which would make it easier for healthcare providers to participate in Medicaid programs outside their home state. As you know, with rare diseases, there's a lot of specialists that are treating patients across state lines, so it can make reimbursement and access to those specialists much more difficult. This act will help alleviate some of those concerns. And finally, there's the Medicaid Value-Based Purchasing for Patients bill, which would modernize the Medicaid drug rebate program to allow for creative financing approaches. And that brings me to our next speaker, who just happens to be the sponsor of that legislation. It's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Jake Auchincloss, who represents Massachusetts' 4th District, right next to where I actually live. I drive through his district on my way to work every day. Thank you for the work that you do, so I'll leave the pothole concerns out of my remarks. We appreciate his support as he's a member of the Rare Disease Congressional Caucus and a sponsor of the Medicaid Value-Based Purchasing for Patients Bill. He's also a Newton has been a Newton councilman, entrepreneur, Marine, and very familiar with the Boston-Cambridge area as he attended Harvard and the MIT Sloan. Please welcome Congressman Jake Auchincloss.
Good afternoon, and I appreciate the warm introduction. It's wonderful to be back with the New England Council to discuss an issue close to my heart. I grew up in a family of medical scientists and physicians, and I represent what I often brag on the House floor is the densest concentration of biomedical talent anywhere in the world. And so I'm excited to be here to talk about what I think is the most exciting industry in the world today. It's not artificial intelligence. It's not quantum computing. It's not Web3. It's biology. The scientists who are turning biology into an engineerable discipline are unlocking the tools to not only heal society, but also to feed and fuel it. When chemistry became an engineerable discipline in the 19th century and physics an engineerable discipline in the 20th century, humanity's power increased not modestly, but exponentially. And so too for biology in the 21st century. In healthcare, in agriculture, in energy, in materials and manufacturing, the latent power of biology to improve standards of living while nurturing our planet is immense. The United States government must make American leadership in biotechnology a national priority. And that requires public-private partnerships in 3 domains. First, investing the same financial and political capital in the productive capacity of the bioeconomy as has been invested in the productive capacity of the information economy. Second, upgrading the systems that marry talent with risk capital. And third, improving the ways and means that we pay for value, particularly in the case of health insurance. Let me begin with the first imperative: the productive capacity of the bioeconomy. Over the past 3 decades, the barrier to entry to start a software company has plummeted. From Moore's Law to Amazon Web Services, from APIs to Microsoft's Copilot, the IT industry has abstracted away complexity and leveraged human inputs to an astounding degree. But there's no analog for biology. Biologists don't work in a deterministic environment. They work in a probabilistic one. Programming biology is orders of magnitude more challenging than programming computers. And that is precisely why the United States government must invest in the problem. We need a CHIPS 2.0 for biomanufacturing, not for semiconductor manufacturing. Whether it's the cost of large molecule manufacturing, the cost of applied chemistry and drug development, the cost and risk of clinical trials, the biotech entrepreneurs of tomorrow should benefit from the same plummeting barriers to entry and declining costs of scale that software entrepreneurs have enjoyed for decades. This commitment would be a particular opportunity for Greater Worcester as it seeks to bootstrap a biomanufacturing cluster. Now, as a starting point for a CHIPS 2.0, Congress and the President must reverse the R&D tax penalty from the Trump administration. We've got to fund the science portion of the CHIPS and Science Law, which authorized but did not appropriate the money for both basic and applied research. And we have to resource the initiatives within the President's Bioeconomy Executive Order and the Office of Science and Technology Policy's bold goals for U.S. biotechnology and biomanufacturing. Under both the fiscal year 24 and now the proposed fiscal year 25 funding levels, there will not be the bandwidth to propel those bold goals, as admirable as they are. For example, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which I have encouraged to take the lead on metrology and standards in the bioeconomy, has had its base programming cut in FY24 and then stayed functionally flat in FY25. Think about that. The President has bold goals for expanding the bioeconomy, but we're not funding the institute that creates the standards in metrology to do that. Standardization will be critical for the bioeconomy, and NIST needs more resourcing. Similarly, the Agriculture Research Service, which helps take biotech from coastal states and healthcare applications to heartland states and agricultural applications, is facing an FY25 cut. The US government should be spending more money on basic and applied research and manufacturing excellence, not less. And we should be working with universities and with industries on the inducements necessary to expand bioproductivity in the wider economy. In conjunction to these resourcing efforts, Congress should heed the recommendations of the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, which is well represented by Bay Staters, to streamline the coordinated framework for regulation of biotech so that it promotes the builders in our economy while stopping the snake oil salesmen. Right now, we've got dozens of agencies involved with overlapping remits, but also some gaps. And this leads to my second point. How do we upgrade the systems that marry talent with risk capital? The most important way that Congress can help with that is through comprehensive immigration reform, which I have supported from day one in Congress. Barring that, updating the Department of Labor's Schedule A occupations to fast-track biotech occupations would be an important win. Immigrants with STEM degrees, and in particular physician scientists, are the mavens of biomedical innovation. And this includes Chinese scientists, who I know have been the subject of unfair Department of Justice investigations under the Trump administration. And let me be clear to our Bay State researchers of Chinese origin. You are welcome here, and nobody, including a US Attorney General, has the right to harass you under color of law. America must outcompete the Chinese Communist Party in biotech, including by de-risking supply chains through acts like the Biosecure Act. But industry's global workforce and the international orientation of the research enterprise is an asset, not a liability in that contest. We must reduce the friction and widen the pipeline of STEM immigration. Massachusetts' biomedical success story is one of the world's most ambitious and inventive people choosing to come here. And they're not choosing to come here because of the weather or the traffic or that famous New England friendliness. They're coming here because we solve the world's hardest problems in biology and beyond. The network effects of talent are Greater Boston's greatest advantage. Even immigration reform, though, as aspirational as that may sound in the 118th Congress, is not actually sufficient for the talent formation that America needs to win in the bioeconomy. As the National Science Board has reported, quote, student mathematics performance showed a sharp decline in 2022 compared with pre-pandemic performance in 2019. Indeed, from fourth graders on up, American students are scoring worse on math than at any previous time in the 21st century. After 20 years of progress, it's all been wiped away. This type of regression is why I made reopening schools my day one priority in Congress in 2021, and why every policymaker from local, state, and federal levels should treat excellence in education as a top priority. It's a civil right, and if American students can't do math, our country is depriving ourselves of the brain power to build with biology. Now, when those builders do put themselves forward with new ideas, they need capital and they need encouragement. Yet our current system of research and development funding does not sufficiently incent high-risk, interdisciplinary, or contrarian proposals. The NIH and its fellow travelers in nonprofit science funding, both inside and outside government, should experiment with methodology that funds early career researchers, those who are waiting a decade for their first K1 or K2 from the NIH, those mid-career pivoters to new disciplines. A lot of breakthroughs happen from somebody who spent 20 years in one discipline, moves to a different discipline and sees things with new eyes. And, of course, contrarian points of view. Nobody thought that the mRNA technology that gave us the COVID vaccines was going to work until it worked. Here in Greater Boston, MIT is the engine, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, which I help cite here, and the newly announced Arena Bioworks could help demonstrate better ways to marry risk capital with talent. The foundational layer for these funders, though, remains our academic medical centers, which incubate the physician scientists that shuttle from clinic to lab and drive breakthrough discoveries. These academic medical centers need expanded federal support for their research and residency programs. This investing in value is hard. But buying value should be easier. And this leads me to my third point. Congress must create the conditions for a market that pays for the value of biotech innovation. And this is particularly urgent and vital for healthcare insurers. Disease is expensive, disease is devastating, and inventing a new medicine is a bounty for all humankind. And unlike hospitals, drugs go generic. With the advent of curative cell and gene therapies and multi-indication blockbusters like the GLP-1 inhibitors, new risk-sharing, outcomes-based models for paying, such as are being tested by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation with Vertex and Bluebird for sickle cell disease, are going to be increasingly necessary. And as indicated, I'm a co-sponsor of the MVP Act, which would take an important next step to empower Medicaid to negotiate as well for these rare disease indications. Value, holistically and consistently defined, must be the North Star. Generalized cost-effectiveness analysis accounts for the full flowering of drugs' benefits to society, from reduced hospitalization to option value to caregiver burden reduction. And this methodology demonstrates that market pricing is generating value for patients, the patients of today and the patients of tomorrow. But that value is only accessible to patients through appropriate insurance design. Health insurance companies have created a reverse insurance scheme, whereby out-of-pocket costs from sick people subsidize premiums for healthy people, or pad the profits of the pharmacy benefit managers. Insurance is not just the financial contract, it's a social contract that creates a market for innovators through premiums and assurance for the patients of today and tomorrow through claims. Beneficiaries pay premiums so that when they get sick and a doctor prescribes the medication that's appropriate for them, the insurance plan will make it accessible to them. And accessible means affordable. There is no justification, and I worked in this field, I've got degrees in this field, there is no justification under the economic theory of insurance design for patients to face significant out-of-pocket costs. There is no moral hazard with asthma medication. The 27 million Americans with asthma aren't trying to overuse their inhalers. In those scenarios where there are branded generic medications that are therapeutically equivalent, pharmacy benefit managers can use prior authorization to induce generic uptake. Goodness knows they're not shy about using prior auth. Ultimately, Americans should face low or no out-of-pocket costs for any prescribed medication, in the same vein as the recent wins on $35 insulin and $35 inhalers. That would be a far cry from where we are at now. We are at a situation now where patients routinely pay more out-of-pocket for generic medications than the insurance company is paying. Think about that. They're paying insurance premiums, they're getting a prescribed medication, and they pay more to the pharmacist than the insurance company does. Now, I'm working on legislation to advance this vision and rein in the drug pricing middlemen by delinking their fees from list prices so they don't get paid the higher list prices go, by leveling the playing field for their flat fee startup PBM competitors, and by outlawing the bad faith practices such as are rife in the management of specialty pharmacy that are bankrupting one independent pharmacy every day in this country. Community pharmacists are trusted medical providers, and they are small business owners, and they are on the front lines of this fight against PBMs and their insurance overlords. In the realm of public payer policy, Congress must be cognizant that schemes that purport to save money, like breaking patents or levying punishing price controls, are instead more likely to depress biotech investment just when diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer and diabetes finally seem tractable to treatment. We must improve the ways and means that we pay for value through insurance. We've got to upgrade the systems that marry talent with risk capital, and we've got to launch a CHIPS 2.0 for the productive capacity of biomanufacturing. This can be the century of biology, this can be the American century, and this can be the century in which the United States builds with biology. I'm looking forward to your questions now about how we can get there together.
We have a few minutes for questions. As you're thinking of your questions, maybe I'll just ask the first one. One of our top priorities at New England Council is to try to convince some of your colleagues on the other side of the branch to change the tax code to allow the R&D to be deducted in the year that it incurs. You were a champion in allowing that change in the House, passed the House with bipartisan support, but unfortunately it is not gaining much traction in the Senate. Your thoughts on whether we're going to see any change in that area?
That tax bill is it's struggling right now in the Senate. It's The goal was to get it done, I say the senator's goal was to get it done before tax filing season so the benefits could be realized, particularly the child tax credit benefit could be realized this year, ahead of the election. But that didn't happen. And so now it I think, has missed a critical window. I remain strongly in support. I will say it's not just Republicans who've been opposed. It's been some Democrats in the Senate who've been opposed as well.
And your recent op-ed in the Boston Globe, you did talk about immigration, how important it is here in the Commonwealth, and so many of our distinguished life sciences are immigrants themselves. What exactly would you like to see changed in immigration policy?
Well, I mean, in terms of comprehensive immigration reform, it's the high-skilled visas and the number of them and the friction by which they are allocated, and really just changing what has been a lottery system that is fundamentally unfair, I think, into one that has transparent and logical rules behind it. That's the goal. That's the place we all want to end up. In the near term, though, getting the Department of Labor to change their Schedule A occupations list, which is sort of this hidden little gem of immigration policy, if you can get there. Right now, I believe only nurses are classified on their Group 1 Schedule A for fast-tracked as a highly in-demand occupation. If we could add biotech professions to that, it would be a huge win. And it just requires the Secretary of Labor to assert that there is a sort of perennial, persistent undersupply of those fields, which I think we could do plausibly for biotech.
Questions for the congressman? Don't raise, okay. Just identify yourself.
Yeah.
Wait for the mic.
Rob Boutwell, Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for being here. I was wondering, you mentioned that one of the big things that we need to think about with funding research is funding early career development. How do we incentivize the NIH to take those necessary risks so that we're not seeing the valley of death issues that we see now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a lot of smart people have thought rigorously about it and offered some very concrete proposals. It's an open secret right now that the way the NIH does funding, and I love the NIH. I mean, there's nobody who fights harder for a bigger NIH budget. My dad works there, for goodness sake. Like, I love it. But, you criticize the things that you love because you want them to be better. Scientists apply for NIH grants for research they've already done. And then they say that by the time I get this money, I'll be able to generate preliminary results for the research I'm about to do. And that's a rational response to the incentives that are in place, which is to say that it's becoming more small C conservative institution in how it allocates funding. We have got to create structural changes to make it easier to get funding for contrarian ideas, for early stage ideas. And some of the ideas that have been put forward have been like the golden ticket approach, which is to say that in a peer review setting, reviewers get so many golden tickets per cycle, and they can allocate one golden ticket to say, I think this idea is going to work, and I'm vetoing everybody else. And that's a way to get big swings, right? Because sometimes there's only one person who believes it's a good idea. So it introduces some volatility into the funding. I think, of course, another one is just more money, right? Let's widen the aperture. In real terms, the NIH's budget has gone down in the 21st century and gone down pretty drastically. So we've got to allocate more money. And then I think the third, and I'm excited about this, is this rise of focused research organizations. Arena BioWorks is here in Boston, but there's a bunch in California as well. And they're almost like nonprofit or like pseudo non-for-profit competitors to the NIH. That's long-term patient capital, 15-year, 20-year locked-in capital, everything from bench all the way to bedside. And I think that's going to be a really interesting funding model that we're going to see more universities and endowments and insurance companies put their patient capital behind.
Other questions for the congressman? You just mentioned that...
Nobody's going to ask me about the Orphan Drug Act. I came here ready to get into a debate about the Orphan Drug Act, about the...
You mentioned that the Congress right now is not inclined to increase NIH funding at all.
Well, this is my debate with the Republicans, is they're sitting there talking about outcompeting China in science and technology, and yet they're proposing budgets that slash basic research funding and Head Start slots. We're not going to outcompete anybody if we're not doing early education, if we're not doing math education, if we're not funding science. I mean, come on, this is the basics.
Questions? Maybe one more question? Yes. The mic is here, and just identify yourself.
I'm Heidi Ross of the National Organization for Rare Disorders, and I can't let you go by without asking you an Orphan Drug Act question if you want one. I mean, it'd be criminal. So the IRA has passed. It is the law of the land, and I think that we as a community have concerns, and a lot of different proposals have been put forward to try to address specific pieces of it. And NORD is supportive of some of those and hasn't waited on others. But from your perspective, what do we need to do to make the case around changes to the IRA that might be really necessary for the rare disease community in what we acknowledge is a very politically charged atmosphere?
Yeah, very politically charged right now going into the election. I understand intimately the biotech provisions of the IRA and was involved in negotiating many of them. No legislation is perfect, hasn't happened yet. Even major Democratic healthcare wins like the Affordable Care Act, we worked on them, right? We worked on them for a decade to get them to the right place, and still working on them. I would like Congress to consider a scenario in which orphan drugs, or I should say drugs, can have as many orphan indications as necessary or as they are able to get indicated by the FDA up until 200,000 total patient population. You can have 15 drugs, you can have one drug, 200,000. And CMS and FDA would jointly define what the patient population is because I know it gets squishy. After that, the clock starts for negotiation. I worry that the Orphan Act as put forward under ENC goes a little too far. I think my proposal is a Goldilocks.
Did I see a hand up in the back? Yes, sir. Want to wait for the mic and just, again, introduce yourself?
I was wondering if you had any status updates on the Creating Hope authorization, just because the rare pediatric voucher, I think, is critically important, especially for ultra-rare. I think that's a big differentiation. We mentioned 7,000 to 10,000 rare diseases, but how many of them are ultra-rare and really aren't getting the capital spent on dedicated to them?
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of that legislation. It passed, I believe it passed ENC with a strong, Energy and Commerce Committee with a pretty strong margin, which makes it a good candidate for what we would say is a suspension vote, basically the only kind of law that can pass this Congress, which is when Democrats and Republicans work together because the Republican Party can't work with itself. So it's in a strong position. It's got good backing. I believe the ranking member of Energy and Commerce did not support it. That might be the impediment. I said this to a couple of folks as I walked in. I think in the long run, we've got to consider how we talk about rare diseases and rethink that designation of calling them rare always, because I think rare makes something seem to the average American as though it's something they don't have to worry about. But we are heading into an era when, because of genomics-guided insights, it's going to be personalized. It's not rare when it's happening to you, right? And so it's going to be personalized medicine. And that, I think, Americans can get very excited about. And so there's almost this confluence happening of mainstream pharma getting into cell and gene therapies along with the rare disease community that has always been dealing with more idiosyncratic conditions. And that, I think probably bodes pretty well for policy treatment of rare diseases.
Well, with that, we want to thank the Congressman not only for being here, but for his strong advocacy on life sciences and so many other industries here in New England that keep the innovation economy going. But we thank him for always being available, and we wish him much success at the end of this Congress and on all your legislation. Thank you very much. If we could have the esteemed panelists come to the head table here with...
To Congressman for his great remarks, and certainly echo the sentiments around the Congressman's advocacy, particularly in the rare space. We'll go ahead and get started with our panel and continue the discussion on rare disease and innovation more generally. By way of introduction, I'll introduce myself, and then what we'll do is go down and have the panelists introduce yourself and just give a little bit of background and perspective. But I am Del LaBelle. I head up U.S. Government Affairs and Health Policy at Alexion. And as Scott mentioned, we have been on a 30-year-plus mission solely dedicated to the discovery and research of rare disease. So I am thrilled to be here today, and why don't we go down the line?
Great. Very nice to be here. I'm Irene Abrams. I'm the Vice President for Technology Development and New Ventures at Boston Children's Hospital. And in that role, I oversee our commercialization of research efforts. And people are very familiar with Boston Children's clinical care, but Boston Children's has an enormous research endeavor as well. We're the largest pediatric research hospital, but also the third largest independent research hospital in the U.S. by research dollars. So lots to talk about there. Really looking forward to the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dwayne Clark. I'm the General Manager for Rare Diseases at Sanofi. Been associated with rare diseases for the past 17 years. Currently, we have 7 approved products, multiple products in the pipeline, from ultra rare to rare. And, you know, our commitment has been unwavering for the past 40 years. And this is why this conversation is so important as we continue to, you know, plot the course for not just rare diseases, but, you know, as said earlier, you know, looking about how we personalize and make sure that we not only reduce reduce the odyssey that these patients go through, but also provide them treatments that is going to really change their lives.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Betsy O'Neill. I'm from Amgen. I've also been in rare disease for about 20 years. I'm the Vice President of External R&D, so my job is to try to bring more rare disease drugs into Amgen. I joined Amgen from Horizon Therapeutics following the acquisition late last year, so I've only been with Amgen for about 6 months, but I've been, and I was at Horizon Therapeutics, which has now become the rare disease business unit at Amgen. So as a company, we're newer to rare disease, but as a team, we have a lot of rare disease experience. And also looking forward to this panel. I think we have some interesting topics, and I always love to hear, you know, big discussions about rare disease, so thrilled to be here today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heidi Ross. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the National Organization for Rare Disorders. And since the representative and Scott did such a nice job talking about the Orphan Drug Act, the thing to know is that NORD was born out of the Orphan Drug Act. The Orphan Drug Act came along because a group of parents looked around and saw that there were no therapies available for their children living with rare diseases. So as a result of that advocacy, 41 years ago, we had the Orphan Drug Act signed into law, creating critical incentives that have driven robust rare disease drug development in our community. And NORD was born out of that effort. We are now an organization that is Boston-based outside of Quincy, and we offer not only the policy work that I do, making the case at the state and federal level for the incentives and the policies that are needed to benefit the rare disease community, but we also have a robust medical affairs program where we have over 40 centers of excellence that have been designated as rare disease centers of excellence by NORD. We run robust education, patient assistance programs, and really seek to be that one-stop shop for the rare disease community. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Craig Wilkinson. I am the Senior Medical Director, Head of U.S. Medical Affairs for Novocure. I might be a little bit different aspect on this panel for a few reasons. One, where I'm in the medical device field. Novocure uses tumor treating field therapies to treat rare and difficult to treat cancers. We have indications approved in glioblastoma for the recurrent and newly diagnosed setting. We are launching a lung product this summer, hopefully, as well as some new pipeline data on brain metastases and hopefully in the ovarian and pancreatic space coming soon. So we picked some hard ones to treat for sure. Some of them are rare, some of them are maybe more common. I also am a radiation oncologist by training and life, essentially. Stopped practicing about 1.5 years ago when I joined Novocure, but I had been in large private practice for over 18 years in Georgia. I might be also the foreigner here. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina as well, so there we go. This is my first time in Boston. I do have 2 ties here. My wife, well, not Boston, but New England. My wife is from Glastonbury, Connecticut. And what might be more local is that I grew up initially playing Little League Baseball with Jason Varitek until he was, in Florida, elementary, middle, and high school. He was so good back then. And I quit playing because I got hit in the back from a line drive by him. So that just ruined it. So anyway, thank you for having us.
good story. I used to live in Glastonbury myself, actually.
Oh, okay.
Believe it or not. We love Jason Veritek. Speaking of New England more generally, the trajectory from an innovation standpoint has been quite nice, and I think continues to ascend, quite frankly. And I'll open this up to each of the panelists to get your perspective, but what in your mind has made New England such a hub for innovation? Start anywhere.
Go ahead, Irene.
I'll talk from my purely academic medical center perspective, but I think the fact that we've got MIT, we've got Harvard Medical School, we have all of the teaching hospitals, not just in New England, but sort of in the neighborhood. When the Broad Institute started, they would show this slide of all of the institutions, with the Broad Center at the time, but around, say, Kendall Square, including the teaching hospitals over at Longwood, and the amount of, intellectual power, the volume of research dollars in such a small place, I think, is a piece of what really drives the ecosystem and the level of collaboration among the scientists in New England is kind of unbelievable. And I think even if you look at the Bay Area, where there's a great concentration of great institutions and great hospitals, they're spread out in a way, and it's almost the physical closeness, I think, really impacts it as well.
Since we're going down the line, I'll go next. So I think it's a few things. I think number one, I think when you look across New England, whether you're in a pharma biotech company, in the medical arena, you're in the tech arena, everybody has this responsibility and expectations that you're going to continue to drive the success, because we've massed one of the largest biopharma industries, medical industries in the world. But you have all the pieces here. You have science innovation. You have tech innovation. You have capabilities. And I think the capabilities, to me, that's really important, because when I talk about capabilities, I talk about talent density. And talent density is so important because we have the talent density here. Now, one of the advances, I think, over the last few years is we went from talent density driving success to this idea that talent density plus AI is better than either alone. And one of the things that we're working for at Sanofi is we want to be the leader in a company fully driven by people and AI. Let me putting that into practice. So you can make decisions on big data sets, and you can do what-if scenarios. How is this going to impact the community? You can drive research and development better, quicker, smarter, faster with capabilities or workforce density plus AI. From a rare disease perspective, we can find patients much, much faster. Scott talked about the idea that 5 years, we have ultra rare that some of these we have been in the system for 20 years. And through AI, we can find where these patients are, work with their healthcare providers, at least give them the option for a treatment if it exists. So capabilities or workforce density plus AI combined with the innovation around science and technology is really the drivers of success in my mind in what we've masked here in New England.
And because of what Dwayne and Irene said, you have the patients. They're coming from around the world to come to Boston because you have that matching of knowledgeable healthcare providers, incredible innovators, remarkable scientists. They come to Boston for those healthcare services because there's such a great concentration of all of those different pieces. And it's not unusual in the rare disease space to only have 1 or 2 healthcare providers in the entire country that have expertise in your condition, but there's a huge percentage of them that are coming to Boston because those providers with that expertise are here. And they're able to enroll in the clinical trials, they're able to get the right treatment at the right time to give them the best chance of an optimal health outcome. And that's really important to the patient community. And I'm not actually from Boston, from Tucson, Arizona. But I will say we're really lucky to have that here.
You took everything out of my mouth, because as a physician being out of the state, patients want second opinions. They want to make sure that their doctors are doing the right thing. And there are probably less than a handful of places in the country, Boston being one of the top ones, obviously. Speaking of the density, you got Houston. That's about the only one I can think of geographically where everything is so condensed. I think there's 50-something hospitals in that one section of town. But anyway, the talent here, the innovation, the technology, I mean, you have all that on top of the medical expertise and the scientific education here is, second to none. I mean, it's evident worldwide, not just in the States. So.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing I would add on to that, I think in addition to all the talent, the patients, and all that is, you have kind of this ecosystem here, I think, where you have also investors. What we do is expensive, it costs money. Having those venture capitalists there that have the money to fund, using the expertise of all of these other people to advise which companies to fund, and also having even just simple things like law firms, accounting firms know how to run the numbers, make the things work, support all the things. So it's a lot of different pieces that really need to come together, and there's only, I think, a couple areas, in the country where it's all come together, but having that toehold for the entrepreneurs of being able to, if you have an idea, being able to form a company around it and being able to get the support to build out a company. Because if you're a scientist with a good idea, you've never started a company before and had HR and how do you pay employees and all that stuff, right? So that ecosystem, people complain about VC sometimes, but they actually can really help you in the beginning stages. And obviously the funding is super important to get there as well. So,
all very good points. So thinking, kind of the opposite of what you see as challenges and threats to innovation. Sometimes we see policy, good policy as a driver of innovation. Sometimes we see bad policy as a detractor of innovation. But we'll open this up to the panelists as well from your perspective, if you could opine on that question.
I'll jump in. So first of all, I'm an adopted Bostonian. You probably noticed from my accent, I may not have been originally from here, but I'm adopted. So to me, the challenges that we have sort of builds on my last remarks. So, we have, as all of the organizations here, Sanofi has worked with and advised the governor's office and so many people about how we protect what we have. And I think there's a few things that we always have to remember. Number one is talent density, workforce density. Number two is this is changing so fast. I mean, we talked about going from rare to personalized, and the world has changed. So how do we make sure that talent density is trained and development never ever stops? Because we have so many people, and it's just not the science, it's the technology, it's the finance, it's the marketing, it's the commercialization, it's the manufacturing. It's all of these things that go into this, making sure you have the talent, you develop your talent. And then how do you retain the talent in New England? Because we don't want the talent to go someplace else. And I think the other piece is that we have to remember that we aren't competing with ourselves. We're competing in a global economy. We're competing for not just the science, the people, the technology. It's global, and so we have to keep that in mind. So if we all come together and we say we have a common purpose, and we're going to step up, and we're going to come together to say, how do we continue to build and grow? That's how we win. Because to me, I look at it as the mountain. Right now, I truly think that in New England, we are at the top of the mountain in this arena, in this industry. But we have people climbing that mountain really, really fast. And the only way that we keep our place is we make that mountaintop a lot higher. It's not by just sort of trying to defend people off. It's how do we advance? How do we get better, quicker, smarter, faster? How do we get the talent? How do we keep the talent? And then how do we bring that tech innovation, that science innovation, and all the pieces to the puzzle together?
Yeah, and I would say, I think it's important, this topic's been touched on by the earlier speakers, but I think, the policies that are out there, I think it's really important to make sure, I'm not always sure if they're intended or unintended consequences, but there can be some pretty serious consequences. Like I think, when the IRA rolled out and there was this provision around single orphan disease, I mean, there are many drugs that could work in a multitude of diseases. We have a big inflammation autoimmune group within Amgen, and we have some, big drugs for asthma, et cetera, but we have some drugs for rare diseases, and, they would probably work in a lot of different diseases, and this is kind of becoming a disincentive to try to get approval for other indications, and we have to do a lot of thinking about how does it, we're a publicly traded company, we have an obligation to investors, and we have to figure out how to make it work. I mean, luckily, I think the decisions we've made so far haven't been hugely changed by it, but I think it's a looming threat, and I think it's deterring, especially, if I already have positive data in phase 2, it's easy to move into other things, but if I'm in a very early stage, I can't count on putting it everywhere where it would help, and it's really has put a damper already, I think, on initiating new programs, and so I don't know how that law came. I'm not in the policy team, so I don't want to embarrass the company, but I don't know where that idea came from, but I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, the Orphan Drug Act, originally made a big impression, like having the R&D tax credit and all those things. Like you said, it created NORD, and we had whatever the numbers were, 38, and now there's 1,200. I mean, that's all based on these policies that really encouraged drug discovery, drug development, got a lot of funding for early programs, made it a lot easier to justify going after rare diseases, and it's changed so much. Yeah. I mean, you've been around the block too, right? So it's a little disheartening to see when some of these things come down the road. I think particularly the IRA, that provision in the IRA is the one that comes top of mind with specifically orphan drugs. But.
Well, and I think we know what happens when those incentives aren't aligned and those incentives aren't enough to spur rare disease drug development. It is a pre-ODA world where there are fewer than 40 drugs approved to treat rare diseases. And now we have 1,225 FDA-approved indications, I think, when I looked yesterday, which is amazing. But there's no silver bullet to rare disease drug development. It is a layering of different incentives on to be able to make that challenging business case that, yes, we are going to pursue this rare indication. We're going to take the time to invest significant dollars, manpower, resources to do so. And so there was a question earlier about the Creating Hope Reauthorization Act, the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. That was created less than 10, well, I guess it's only been 12 years ago now. And it's up for reauthorization. And we're seeing pushback from certain Democrats around that because it's being labeled as a giveaway to pharmaceutical companies. And that's just not the case. That program has launched 50 different priority review vouchers. That means 50 different rare disease communities that treat pediatric rare diseases now have a safe and effective FDA-approved indication. These are people's lives. These are patient populations for which there was nothing on the market beforehand. So that incentive was enough for some companies to be able to say, yes, we're going to pursue this. And the end result is that thousands of patients now have an FDA-approved treatment where there was none previously. That's really, really critical that those different incentives, that we don't have a rebalancing where we go back to a pre-ODA world where there's not enough to justify that rare disease drug development.
Yeah, so.
Oh, one last thing though, Del. I think the congressman has left, so I will briefly correct him. Please don't say anything. There has not been a vote yet in Energy and Commerce. Representative Pallone has not said no yet. And so if you are a company that has benefited from a rare disease priority review voucher, please reach out to me. We want to hear from you, and we have some very specific asks that we'd love to have you weigh in. There is likely to be a markup in the next couple of weeks, and so there's still a chance to have your voice be known on this issue.
Can you just explain to the group a little bit more about that voucher program, some of the, mechanistically how it works, the nuts and the bolts?
So there are 3 priority review voucher programs that Congress has created over the last couple of decades. And in 2012, the newest one was the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. And what that does is if you as a company develop a safe and effective therapy for a population that a rare disease that primarily affects children, you're given a priority review voucher. And that can be used in 2 different ways. You as your own company can utilize that to move from a standard approval period, which is usually about 10 months, to 6 months with the FDA, and get your product on the market 4 months faster. which can make a big difference when you're looking at a bottom line. You also can sell that voucher to another company that can then use that voucher to get a shortened review, a 4-month shortened review on their product. And that is a funding stream for a company, particularly small biotechs that were otherwise going to be looking for other resources. To sell that voucher gives them some assurances and allows them to continue that R&D investment in ultra-rare and have a healthier bottom line at that point. And so the program's only been around for about 12 years. And we know that rare disease drug development takes a long time. And so the fact that we've seen 50 different vouchers issued is really wonderful, but it means we don't have a lot of data right now. And so we have some skeptics in Congress that are saying, this really isn't necessary. We've got enough incentives to support rare disease drug development. And we fundamentally disagree with that idea. And so there's a significant effort underway to reauthorize this program in the face of some Democratic opposition, but we do have some strong bipartisan support. And so I think, from our perspective, this is one tool in a toolbox that we need to support rare disease drug development.
Yeah, good points.
And put that in perspective. We launched a product for ASMD, 21 years to develop. It's not hundreds of thousands, it's just a few thousand patients in the U.S. And 6 months makes a big difference because there's nothing to treat. And, you know, these kids are passing away at a very, very early age. And so that's why this program is so important. Because it's just about how do you accelerate to make sure the products get to the patients as quickly as possible, especially the kids.
Dwayne, could you carry on with that and maybe expand to share what some of your other federal priorities look like from a legislative and a policy standpoint, and then expand on that, including Orphan Cures Act?
Yep. So I think that Scott laid out the Orphans Cure Act so well. I think at the end of the day, within the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a disincentive. If you have a molecule that can treat multiple rare diseases, there's a disincentive to take that forward, because you have to start negotiating after the first indication within the IRA. The Orphans Cure Act is one mechanism with the intent to fix that. Because if there's 10,000 rare diseases and 95% of them aren't treated, at the end of the day, if you can get one molecule to treat multiple, that is a win for the world. That is a win for the world. That makes this world a better place. And so I think the intent is we have to not disincentivize a orphan drug that has so few patients, and finding these patients is so hard, to disincentivize not getting it for multiple indications of multiple diseases. So I think that is really, really important. I think Scott laid it out beautifully. I think the other two pieces of legislation that's important from my perspective, you know, it goes back to what was mentioned on the podium, and that's the telehealth. You know, in rare disease, there's evaluators and there's treaters, and sometimes they're different. You may get evaluated at Mass General, but that patient is going to get treated and followed in Des Moines, Iowa. I don't know why I said Des Moines, Iowa, but it's Des Moines. It's Des Moines, Iowa. And so you want to make sure that they can collaborate on the care of that patient, and it's reimbursed. I mean, it's that simple. It's not about... there's not a healthcare professional that's going to get rich off of this, but the patient and their family will so much benefit from that collaboration on their care. I think the third that I think is important, and we've talked about it, is the pediatric voucher. I mean, that is really important, because you're talking, if you think about it, probably 60 to 70% of the rare indications of those patients are kids. And so finding them and getting them enrolled takes a long time. So anything you can do to speed up their access to an approved treatment is important. So to me, those are the three that really are important to this community.
Indeed. Irene, in your experience commercializing rare therapies discovered at Boston Children's, what do you see as the biggest barriers to how they get to patients and how to overcome them?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. The discussion we've had, and that the Congressman talked about, there was a lot of focus on incentives. What are the incentives for investing in rare disease? And at Boston Children's, we see so many kids with rare diseases are on the front lines of doing, discovering the genomic basis of the disease, trying to come up with treatments. But Boston Children's Hospital, like the other academic medical centers, we are not a drug development company. We can't bring treatments all the way to the clinic. We always have to find a commercial partner who will help bring it forward. Once in a while, we have the rare physician sponsored phase 1 clinical trial. But for the most part, when we see things successfully make it to patients, it's through a partnership with industry. And if we want to attract a partner in industry, there have to be incentives that make sense for that partner, no matter how much they may want in their heart to treat patients with rare disease. At the end of the day, it has to make economic sense. And I think that's why the incentives we've been discussing are so critical. So for us, it's always about finding a partner who will make the investment to bring the technology, through whatever kind of regulatory approval and manufacturing pathway needs to happen in order for them to make it to patients. And a lot of the incentives we've talked about have impacted our ability to commercialize technology. Right now, we're in discussions with a group that wants to raise a fund to support the development of rare genetic insights into rare genetic diseases that have come from a big project we have at Boston Children's. We've been funding the sequencing of a lot of our rare disease patients as well as their parents, so we're doing the trios. But it's been very difficult to take the insights that we've made in this large genomic diagnostic research to patients. And one of the things that is incentivizing this particular group to think about investing in it is the rare disease vouchers, the pediatric vouchers, because to get return on an investment like this, that's one of the possible ways that they're thinking on it. And if we could do it, I think it'll be the very first time there's been this kind of effort at Boston Children's to really move these sort of early genetic discoveries into treatments. So we really are always looking for ways to incentivize companies to work with us so that more drugs get to patients. And I just wanted to mention briefly another policy issue that Children's has been really involved in, which is called, I had to write it down, Accelerating Kids' Access to Care. And this is really important to us. We talked about how patients need to travel to centers of excellence, particularly in rare disease. And if you think about a lot of the cell and gene therapies that are on the market, they're not a pill that you can ship out to somebody. The patient has to come. They have to go through a chemotherapy regimen. They have to have their cells treated. And they need to be in a center of excellence. About half of the kids who in the U.S. get their health care through Medicaid, and when you talk about kids with rare diseases, it's an even higher percentage because often the parents have to quit work so that they can take care of the kids. The financial burden on the family is so high. So I think for kids with rare diseases, almost 70% of the kids are on Medicaid. And right now, it's very burdensome for kids funded by Medicaid to get treatment in other states. And so this Accelerating Kids' Access to Care law that it's in its early days. It hasn't been approved yet, but what it does is it allows states to rely on some of the regulatory clearance for doctors that other states have already done. So all the docs at Boston Children's are approved for Medicaid in Massachusetts, but they're not approved in any other state. And so any other state, if a family wants to send their kid to Boston Children's, the Boston Children's doctors who treat them have to go through an approval process in each of the other 49 states. So the goal is to have, the law is set up so that, if you're in Oklahoma and you want to bring your kid to Boston Children's, you can rely on the Massachusetts Medicaid approval or vice versa. So it's just to reduce the regulatory burden and the time delay for kids to come and get treatment at centers for excellence and get access to care that might not be available in their local community. So those are the things I think about: incentives for developing drugs for kids with rare disease, and then reducing the regulatory hurdles to the actually getting that care.
Indeed. Craig, shifting to you and glioblastoma and Novocure's treatment for that rare disease. What impact do you think that has had on patients?
Thank you. So glioblastoma is a rare brain cancer. The most common types of brain tumors or cancers are actually from other parts of the body. So when somebody has a primary brain tumor like glioblastoma, it's a very devastating diagnosis for sure. It's very rare. It's usually in the 60s in terms of age groups. So Novocure has gone after these hard-to-treat rare diseases. And if you don't know what tumor treating fields are, it's basically alternating electrical field therapy driven by a device generator that delivers at certain frequencies that are specific to cell types. We know that the glioblastoma cells respond to 200 kilohertz, for example. And it's delivered safely to the brain tumor and the surrounding brain tissue around it. The device causes, one of the things that just blew my mind of the simplicity of the mechanism of action is it basically, from the basic level, it disrupts cellular division, leading to significant damage within the cell and surrounding, environment, to the point of when I used to show the video to patients, it was basically middle school, high school biology 101 with cells trying to divide and they didn't work, and the video back then looked like they just kind of like started shaking and exploded, and patients were like, wow, I remember that. So it was, basic cell science. And we now learn that this disruption in cellular division also leads to significant downstream effects, and there's other mechanisms of action that are important, including, DNA damage repair, cell membrane permeability, autoimmune response in the environment within the cell, and so many more that we're still exploring in the lab. So it does have this profound effect. I think we have shown in large phase 3 clinical trials that there is a survival benefit for glioblastoma, and since 2015, basically, there is nothing else that's shown any benefit. And it's really difficult to explain that to physicians when they're used to medicines that may have one mechanism of action. So I have this drug that does this, and then I have this drug that does this, but I can't wrap my head around a medicine that can do so many different things. And being a radiation oncologist, I understand what cellular damage can do. It's a physical therapy. It's X-rays damaging the cell, causing significant effects in multiple different ways. So it's kind of hard to, that's a barrier that we sometimes face. Some of the barriers in terms of policy I'm not super familiar with, because being a physician, I tend to stay away from that as much as I can. But learning, this is also my first industry job, so it's been a lot of fun. But learning the process of what we went through in the early days is, we basically got FDA approval and gave away therapy for about 7 or 8 years because CMS didn't agree. And that's a major barrier. And then we're now facing multiple launches potentially in the near future, including one this summer. We don't want to face that again. We want to get this care to patients. So there are some legislations that don't even touch medical devices. And then there are others that may potentially be blocking them. And some of those aren't being changed or worked on fast enough, so we face those as well. Other barriers that we see are basically, the device itself is placed on the head. I happen to be a good model for it. I have no hair. So patients do have to shave their head, and it's a life-changing thing. It's something they have to almost develop into a habit and make it part of their life. But when you see a significant survival benefit for somebody who may only have 6 months to live and they're living many more months or even years in some cases, to me that's like having a lottery ticket where you get to spend more time with your family and friends, you get to do more things. These are some of the things that I try to impress on physicians and others in the community, as well as even representatives in Congress, saying, hey, if you were given this diagnosis or any of these diagnoses, what would you miss? What would you not be able to do anymore? Who would you miss? And so these are important things to think about when we're trying to handle all these rare diseases. It's a whole different side when you're looking at the patient and the caregiver as well. So I think those are important things to think about. And Novocure makes big impacts on that. We actually take the device to the patient's house and help them learn how to shave their head, put the arrays on to actually handle any errors that might pop up, anything that can pop up. So we have device support specialists that come out. Our commercial sales force is in touch with patients and physicians on a routine basis, helping manage these issues. The main side effect from it is really just skin irritation underneath the arrays. There are no other major side effects. It's pretty amazing. So when you see survival curves that spread over time, and they're getting better over years, and minimal side effects, you know, a physician who's prescribing a drug and sees that would just launch fireworks over that and run to the Capitol and say, pass this now, I need FDA approval, I need insurance approval, I need all this immediately. But there's a significant difference in the pathway for medical devices, so it's a challenge. But we bring it to the patient. We actually take feedback from the patient. Our arrays are actually going through a process right now of we're developing a new array that's more flexible and more comfortable for patients, so we hope to roll out later this year here in the U.S. It's already being used in a few countries in Europe right now, and they're loving it, which is amazing. We have so many things that the patients say, hey, I want this different. I think this could be a little bit improved. I think this could be an issue that you need to solve, and we take those all into account. Our operations is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Well, as long as the therapy's on, it's working. Mm-hmm. Okay, and these tumors don't go away. Right. You know, the surgical resection at best is what we call gross total resection, which that means I take out what I can see. You don't go in there and look with a microscope. I don't have a cool iPhone app right now to scan somebody's head to see if there's any cells left behind. That would be amazing. But for the most case, those resections are even just subtotal resections or even a biopsy where you have to leave a significant portion of the tumor in. So these patients typically get surgery, and it's pretty emergent. They have significant side effects right away. They have neurological changes out of the blue, go to the ER, diagnosis of something in their head, rush to surgery, get a diagnosis of glioblastoma. They usually start chemotherapy and radiation, so that takes 6-7 weeks to get going and finish. And then we then follow that up with maintenance chemotherapy and tumor treating field therapy. We tend to say up to 2 years, but we can even see use after first recurrence, which is great. Some patients even stay on it longer because they're like, listen, I will just use anything I can. In terms of hours per day, we recommend at least 18 hours per day. So it ends up being about 75% of the time. But there's still even a benefit in a lower percentage, at least 50% or more. It's a lifestyle change. It has to be something they want to do. It has to be something that they get used to. So that's a little bit difficult sometimes in some patients. Some patients have no problems. Others have issues. Sometimes it's a caregiver issue. Sometimes it's a neurological issue and the physical ability to put them on or maintain them. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's I live in Miami and I don't want to shave my head. I live in a very hot place that's going to be too hot. Sometimes we actually see physicians saying, well, my patients won't want that. And they're doing that predetermined bias up front without even telling the patient. So
interesting.
It's tough.
Fascinating technology. Yeah. Last question to you, Betsy. Wondering if you can expand on some of the challenges around drug development for rare disease.
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of them, but there's challenges across the board. There's challenges for patients finding the right drugs to try. There's challenges on our side. I would divide it into research and development. So, the researchers may have a good idea. They need to figure out how to get that, into the clinic. And then once it's in the clinic, how do we execute the clinical trial? So maybe I'll drill down a little bit, say on the research side, like how do you start a new project if you're wanting to address a particular rare disease. One area which you touched on a little bit already is kind of, and you mentioned as well with this sequencing. I'm glad to hear you're sequencing rare disease genomes, patient DNA information. We have a group called Decode Genetics at Amgen. It's in Iceland, and originally they had DNA sequence information from Icelandic patients. They've expanded more broadly to a lot of other populations now, and they have these big, powerful algorithms to look for new targets to go after to address particular genes and particular diseases. It's a lot easier to do that for common diseases because when you have however many patients of DNA information you have in your database, you're going to just find more patients that have a common disease than a rare disease. So I'm very excited to hear that you guys are working on sequencing rare disease genomes, and these algorithms need a certain database size. So that will really boost. I'm glad to hear you're doing that. But sometimes even with that, it's not enough, and they have to go back, they'll use the old school methods, I will say, to try to understand the biology, pick a target, pick a drug. There's a lot of gene therapy out there right now. Gene therapy is an interesting case, I think, because unlike a lot of other modalities of, like a pill or a, IV antibody drug or whatever, with gene therapy, it's actually pretty easy to make the drug, find out which thing is going to be your drug. If a gene is missing, you make a, gene therapy with that gene, right? But then the challenge becomes, how do you take that through? How do you get them? The manufacturing is very expensive, getting the funding. A lot of those have kind of stalled, I think, now, unfortunately, because it's been tough to figure out how to get the commercial model to work and the reimbursement to work. So there's a big, huge bolus, I think, of gene therapy drugs that probably will work to some degree, or maybe even, the C word cure, we call it. Don't like to say that too loudly, but until we're sure, right? And so that's being held up by understanding, are we going to be able to figure out how to, normally we charge every year for a patient on a chronic therapy, and we've worked out how to do that. But if you have a one-time therapy that provides, whether it's a lifetime benefit or maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, we haven't figured out how to work the payers to pay for those things yet. And it's kind of starting to stifle earlier innovation. So even as a researcher with a great idea and a great drug candidate, you can be stymied by commercialization, challenges faced by other people in other diseases. So there can be these very broad challenges that are faced. I would say on the clinical development side, just setting up clinical sites and enrolling patients. I mean, we have expert centers, I think, especially in the rare diseases, attract, expert centers. But we need patients, we need a diverse patient set. We go internationally. We have sites in Europe. In some ways, Europe can be easier, actually, for rare diseases because everyone's on the national health plan, so you don't have to fight through, 26 different, states, people coming from out of state or different insurance companies or any of that stuff. And there's always privacy things, but it's not, some of the HIPAA stuff can sometimes be a challenge. So, but it's also good just to get a diverse patient population and good representation in the studies. And, each rare disease has its own kind of specific challenges. And so we really try to customize and personalize for each individual rare disease. We spend a lot of time talking, obviously we talk to physicians who treat, but we also like to talk to the patients. One of the things that FDA is pushing, and the European regulators are leading, and FDA is now on board with this as well, which is to try to get quality of life endpoints. So it's not just oh, my blood test looks better, which is probably helpful, but I want to know that are you feeling better? Are you functioning better? Are you surviving longer, right? And so sleeping better. I mean, fatigue is a big thing for many of these diseases, right? So we want to understand early on. I'm sure, Dwayne, you guys do this at Sanofi as well. We want to understand, how does this disease impact your life?
Yeah.
And how can we formulate a questionnaire or monitor some aspect of your function, which I can show that this drug's not only making your x-rays look better or your blood tests look better, which we obviously follow all that stuff very closely, but it's actually helping you feel better and perform better, go back to work, be able to drive, all of these things, right? So having that input from the patients is really, really high value for us. And just working, across all of the steps, across all of the things, having broad team. I think the co-localization, even within the company of the team, of having the commercial members talking to the clinical development people, talking to the researchers, and understanding, when you're in the research, this molecule might help the blood test, but I don't think it's going to help the quality of life, so don't make that one, make this one, right? So having the dialogue and the conversation, the flow of information, I think makes a really big difference as well.
And how do we account for that in terms of value? right? Quality of life. That's a whole nother,
Exactly.
whole nother conversation
Exactly.
around value
Exactly.
frameworks
Exactly.
and HTA.
Good news, we've extended for another 3 hours while we
Yeah.
get into the value
Yeah.
conversation.
We've got an opinion on that. Thank you to the panelists. Really, really interesting conversation across a medley of issues. And I think, what it says is there's certainly no shortage of issues, and kind of the need for favorable policies in this space to continue, encouraging innovation, incentivizing, particularly for orphans and rare disease, is never ever more important than now. So thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience for what I think was a great conversation.
I'll just second what Del LaBelle just said. I want to thank first of all, Del did an excellent job in moderating the discussion, and thank the esteemed our panelists. It's got to make you feel good that we are residents of New England with this innovation that's occurring day in and day out by this sector of the economy that some people don't realize how important it is in saving lives. And these are extraordinary heroes that spend day and night trying to find ways of alleviating the pain for so many of our friends and neighbors. So I say thank you to all of them. I hope you enjoyed as well as I did in learning an awful lot this afternoon. But again, Alexion, thank you for coming up with the idea of convening here today. And again, thank you to Sean Malone, Emily Heisek, and we look forward to seeing you at another event of the New England Council. We have the governor next week on the other side of town, the Boston Harbor Hotel, but we hope to see you at a future New England Council event. Hope you have a great day. Thanks very much.